are you making? About $1.50 an hour?
When'd you get a raise?
Frank, here's one for your book. Being your lady this afternoon, you get to go on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
The mind can only absorb what the ass can endure.
Mm-hmm. And don't let your mouth override your ass. Write that one on this little card, because I'm gonna add it to my lexicon and give it back to me. I wasn't gonna make a tomahawk or a hatchet, but I had a personal request just now. The guy said he saw me make one over 20 years ago at Slim Sperling's place in Morrison, Colorado. What was that place called?
Skunk Hollow.
Skunk Hollow. And so I'm going to try to accommodate him. So I'm starting on this little hatchet. I hogged out one that I brought. I thought I was just going to hold it up and say, here it is, but this, we may have to do some more work. This one's unfinished, but it's been ground on. Forge welded eye, and then you forge weld the steel in on the end. That's like an old, maybe 18th century pattern. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention that too. Francis and I had peace and quiet here this morning. He and I were working side by side. I finished my hammer-eye tongs. You can work faster when you're not blabbing away and holding forth. So these will be in the silent auction. And I was asked to put something in the silent auction since I didn't bring anything. This will be in the silent auction. They all have my cartouche on them. And this little creaser will be in the silent auction if anybody wants it. And I got a handle for it too. So we were going to talk about branding irons too. So we may spend more time on the hatchet and less time on the branding irons, but you'll get it all somehow. It's hard to schedule these things just right. If you read the old literature on making hatchets and axes, a lot of times they're made out of a sandwich of two pieces of material. Can I go over there? That old one. Oh, good, thank you. You know where it's perfectly described? Did you ever hear of a book called Ancient Carpenter's Tools by Mercer?
Yeah.
Old Pennsylvania man. He visited a guy in the 20s in Pennsylvania that was still making them like they were making them over 100 years before that. And he would take a chunk of iron and thin it and pull it out into an eye, take another chunk, do the same thing, and faggot weld the whole thing together, and then finally he'd put a little piece of steel in here. Two pieces. Another route to go is to leave a pole and fuller away everything, and then bend around away from the pole. Here's your eye, and then faggot weld it down here. And after I had made a few little tomahawks, I thought, why not just do a loop weld and eliminate all that? And just take a piece of iron and thin it out where the eye is and bring it back on itself and weld it. And then drift it. So I do that.
Frank, do you know why so many tools were made that way with an insert piece of steel or an overlay piece of steel?
Well, I always thought because steel was expensive.
It was because the King of England would not let the colonies make their own tool steel.
Mm-hmm.
They could make the wrought iron, but they had to buy the tool steel from Sheffield.
Mm-hmm. Well, in Spain and Mexico, they had the same situation, only they didn't even allow them to make iron. So for at least 2 centuries, and I understand that England forbade them to make iron initially, but they had a furnace up at Jamestown right away. They just thumbed their noses at the crown. But the Mexicans wouldn't do that. They were good Catholics, and they no iron furnaces. The Indians saw that Jamestown furnace belching smoke because those furnaces were in blow day and night. The Indians didn't like it, so they killed everybody on the plantation and knocked down the furnace. But I think it was running about 5 years. That was the end of the Jamestown furnace. So I've put on the end here what I call a simple scarf. It's a simple taper. I left a little extra thickness. I might need it. This is either A36 or mild steel. All the steel I've used so far has been from that little pile over there, whatever that is. I've thinned about a little more than 4 inches of stock here. So I'm going to bring it on around and lay it down here and weld it on top.
Will you drip this for a round hammer or a teardrop?
Round. I've made about a half a dozen pipe tomahawks in my time, and you can drip those eyes almost any shape. They have fancy shapes for the pipe tomahawks. These were usually round in the old days. The pipe tomahawks, you had lozenge shapes, you had modified teardrop shapes, egg shapes, ovals, squares. There's my setup. You set it up so the loop droops so that you can hit it with your hammer. I usually weld this with a half-face blow right here so that it welds into the teardrop right away. I like a rounded edge on the anvil to weld it on. A good idea is to, before you take your welding heat, is to quench the loop. Because the loop wants to burn up. Because especially. So just quench out a great portion of the loop and then go for your weld. Your first blows are half-face blows, far edge of the anvil.
You're making a fro, Frankie, with the same principles.
Yeah, the top of a chest-high mandrel, cone mandrel, is just the right shape for a fro eye. So weld it up straight and then shape it on the mandrel later. You don't have to worry about the shape round eye. Pardon? Round eye on a fro? A round eye on a fro, yeah. I weld them up straight and then shape them on the cone mandrel. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. The thicker the material, the harder you have to get it to weld. If I had brought this out and used little dink blows, it would not weld, period. So the thicker the material, the harder the blows. Yeah.
What size stock did you start with?
I don't know. I just went over to that scrap pile and I picked a piece. I'll measure it in a minute. Started with 1/2 by 1 1/2, it looks like. Just guessing at tomcats, that's what it looks like. Did you ever guess at tomcats? Which one was it?
Did you ever guess at tomcats? Which one was it?
You get mad at it. So you flux it, and you beat it, and you grit your teeth, and it's still there, and you're madder, you're angrier. You put some more flux on it, you beat the heck out of it, and it's still there. Because you're hitting it too hard. Because that little thin scarf, it seems to me, is drawing faster than it has a chance to adhere, or I'm going to make up a word, cohese. We don't want adhering, we want cohesion. But anyway, that little thin thing, you hit it real hard and it'll draw out more. Faster than it has a chance to stick. That's what I think. That's a theory. That's a Turley theory, after having forge welded and tried to get rid of those little shuts all these years. So you use light, rapid blows and flux with borax, and voila, many times they go away.
And you didn't use any of the other compound on this time, did you?
No, no. And then there are different schools of thought on whether you should put welding compound between interfaces. Like I'm sure Francis does. I don't always. You have two pieces, your faggot welding or whatever, you can leave a gap and pour a little flux inside and then close it. I usually don't do that. I usually just let the heat and the hammer blow direction squeeze the dirt out. So there are different ways of doing this. Anyway, I had it closed and I did not flux between the interfaces. It's just another way. Then you get a drift. You find these at the junkyard. Go to your automobile junkyard. You'll find one. Maybe. I did. Since I missed my welds the first day too, somebody came up to me and asked, maybe I could review the reasons why. And I said, well, if I knew why I missed it, then I would have got it. It is very difficult to analyze sometimes. I know I started with a second-hand fire. I cleaned it once, but I do know that it was a fly ash fire, so shame on me.
When I finished my demo, I looked down and there was a clinker.
Yeah, well, I pulled that out, but there was still a lot of ash. And fly ash, if you build a fly ash fire with ash from the previous fire, and you kind of just fold it into your green coal and just leave a bunch of fly ash in the bottom of your duck's nest, you ain't gonna get a weld. It's gonna stick to your work. So a fly ash fire is just as bad as a clinker fire. And a fly ash fire and a clinker fire are just as bad as a hollow fire. And a hollow fire is hardly any fire at all. You have a big hollow. What the hell is it? It's a hollow. It's a big hole with a bunch of little red-hot coals around it. That's not a fire. I'll tell you what a hollow fire does, though. All that oxygen coming up through your tweer into your duck's nest is going to give you a real thick scale that sometimes even your flux won't cut, if you're lucky enough to get a welding heat. The clinker fire, let me draw on the board. The clinker fire makes an oxidizing fire. A lot of guys think it's just dirt, but don't forget that if this is your duck's nest, here's your ash barrel. This clinker is here and it's displacing coke. There should be coke there, but there's clinker there. One, it chills your blast, but the other thing is it allows extra oxygen into your fire because the oxygen is not being consumed in the combustion process. So extra oxygen comes into your fire and it makes an oxidizing fire. Again, the oxygen will cause heavy iron oxide. We call it scale. So that's another thing. So you don't want a fly ash fire, you don't want a clinker fire, and you don't want a hollow fire. And I think they're all equally evil. A lot of guys, students, they always say, when they miss a weld, they say, but it was sparking. In other words, if it was sparking, that's the whole answer. No way is that the whole answer. But it was sparking. When you drift this, use a very bright heat because the metal will stretch. And the weld a lot of times does want to open up. So if you do it at a dark heat, you're going to be in a heap of trouble. I'm pushing it with my thigh to the far corner of the party hole to give a basis of support for what I'm driving through here. You don't want to just have it all wobbling all over the hardy hole. So I'm pushing it away from me with my thigh. I tell my students to take as many heats as they need to, bright heats, even to the point of taking a light welding heat when they're drifting. When you drift at this heat, like a blood red, you run the risk of the metal not stretching and everything coming apart. So take several heats if you need to. Try to drift it from both sides so you get a little bit of equanimity to your drifting. I know a lot of beginners, they look around to see if you're around, you know. Is Turley up eating lunch? It opens up. But it doesn't matter whether he's around or not.
It still opens.
Still opens up. Keep your pinkies and your fingers out of the way of that heat. Well, as my dear old dad used to say, I'd rather have to do this than work for a living. This is more fun than working for a living, isn't it? No comment. We can drift it later if we need to. It opened up a little bit, but we needed a larger eye anyway. The setup on this weld, I have a hard time explaining this sometimes. Draw you a picture. I'll draw you, this is what it should look like. The loop droops, the scarf is on top. The anvil's here. You're going to hit it with a half-face blow, sometimes called an overhanging blow. And that's going to weld it right here into that teardrop area, right off the bat. Here's the no-no. Here's the no-no setup. If I can draw it, how do you draw something that's incorrect?
Just the way I do.
That's easy, right?
Yeah. Now the scarf is facing the anvil, and the anvil's going to be a big heat sink and suck the heat out of the scarf. So that's up, even though the loop is drooping, it's upside down. Here's another no-no. Now the loop is not drooping, see? So in order to give a half face blow here, you can't. You're going to be digging in with the corner of your hammer, trying to weld it this way. You're going to be pushing your hammer away from you. You're going to get a whole bunch of ugly marks in there. Even though the scarf is on top, it's hard to hit. So the setup is so that it's easy to hit. Why make it? Blacksmithing, to me, is still difficult. So why make it more difficult? By the way, before I welded the eye, I thinned the stock down to somewhere, a quarter or 5/16. So the eye is has less material in it than the parent stock. Need a hot cutter too.
Who's striking?
Those European blacksmiths always hit the heel of the anvil when they call the striker too, because it's real loud and tinny sounding. The guy can hear it. I don't know what this steel is. Makes a real heavy scale though. Gee, maybe it's wrought iron. Likely story. Okay, I'm gonna go to the vice. You can be a vice person though. I thought this was a flux spoon this morning and it turned out to be a leaf. Combo tool. Might need to tighten it again because it loosens because the metal's shrinking. a hot cut. If you think you're getting off center, angle it the way you think you ought to angle it.
Hang on one second. Francis here?
Francis calls this spring steel.
Francis?
Make it fairly deep. This is going to take a while, but it's worth it. If you make a shallow cleft, a little piece of steel a lot of times falls out. Falls on the floor. Makes you angry. Top of your boot. Top of your tinnies. I wore my tinnies today. I'll get it. Thanks.
Approximately how deep?
5/8 or so. If you want to make it deeper, you can. Then make your high carbon steel accommodate itself to that. The piece of steel should be a little wider and a little longer than the cleft. And if you like good old boy terms, the old timers called this a bird's mouth way. Because when you open up the cleft and scarf it, it looks like a bird's mouth. It's kind of a nice name. The kind of thing you make for the black powder guys, and they want to give you $3.98 for it.
When you slap it.
They don't want to give you that.
You know who has more money than the black powder guys? It's the SCA, Society for Creative Anachronism. Start making stuff for them. It may be strange, but they have a bigger pocketbook than the black powder dudes. This ought to just about do it. Go ahead.
I think there's a lot more of them too, aren't there?
Maybe, I don't know. It's a nationwide network. there a ball peen hammer in the shop? I like to sharpen these with a ball peen so I don't.
Small, medium, or large?
Medium, 2 1/4 pounds. 80.
That's,
Yeah, that's good. Hey, that's 2 1/2 pounds. Wait a minute.
I thought it was 3, or 1 3/4.
I've reduced the steel, I've got it a little thicker, and I'm going to sharpen this one side. I usually put barbs on this one side, it helps it stick in there a little bit. I do that on the Hardy. The old-fashioned English word for barbs was rags. If you put rags on your work, then your work was ragged. That's Old English. And they used to rag their work, meaning put barbs on it. That's where ragged comes from. I use a ball peen because there's less chance of me hitting the poor old anvil. And it's kind of hard to sharpen it from the inside out. So I'd rather hit it on the outside. So what you're doing is you're sharpening it and making a simple scarf again. Okay, there's my steel. It's sharpened down to maybe about a 1/16 of an inch. Could be sharper if you want it to be. And then you put your hardy har in the hole here. Nearly always the hardy goes in this way. Sometimes I put it in this way, but it doesn't want to fit, so it's going to go in that way. Put the rags on it, one way is that I came up with is just to hold it at an acute angle and hit it. That's a mighty acute angle. So it gets kind of an oddball appearance on the sharp side. Then I want to notch it but not cut it off a little wider than or rather a little more length and the tomahawk head is wide. Schoolroom chalk stays on just about as good as soapstone does, little known fact. Get rid of your hardy if you're not using it. You might cut off your fingers. So a guy is saying to himself, how in the heck would I ever cut off my fingers on a hardy? That's stupid. Well, it's when it's 11 o'clock at night and you're working by a 70-watt bulb and you have a deadline and they've been calling you on the phone for 2 weeks to get the damned order done. And you go like that. Cut your fingers. It'll happen. It's when you're fatigued. Fatigued and missed. Okay, a vice person, a person with vices.
There you go, Bill.
Just don't tell Sharon.
Open it up and then squeeze it hard. Tighter than a bull's ass and flies easy. Okay, thanks. Clean your fire. No way around it. Don't make any excuses. Clean your fire. You can take a little break here if you want. We'll get to this in a minute. Yeah. The older the blacksmith, the darker the road.
What do you do about the ricochets in your ears?
The ricochets. I'm wearing a face mask because when you forge weld the soup, or what old man Dickinson used to call fleece, I don't know why he called it fleece, the soup flies at right angles to the direction of your blow, nearly always, not always. So when you're welding like this, it usually flies out sideways. But on this particular weld, I'll be using some backing up blows to drive the bit into the hatchet head, and the soup's going to fly up. perhaps. So I'm gonna do this.
Are you flushing down with the borax?
Yeah. And again, different schools of thought. I'm not fluxing the interfaces. I'm just going to put flux around the edges and hope that my hammer blows will squeeze the fleece out.
Now, because that's thin, there'll be light blows.
Light to start and then heavy. No, if you hit two, if they're all light blows, it won't weld. But light blows to start it, then heavier.
You stay right there. Keep it on.
Well, that's what I was thinking. That's what I was gonna, stand up and move.
Stay right there. Keep it on.
We got a bunch of Indian wins.
I guess Francis is not here. He gave me a piece of steel. He said it was called spring steel. I didn't spark test it. I'm assuming it's like a high carbon steel. It could be a silicon manganese. But in any event, the welding heat's about the same on a silicon manganese spring steel or on a straight carbon high carbon. And I like to weld at a sweating heat. The English call it a light welding heat. I call it a sweating heat. The British also call a sparking heat. What I call a sparking heat, they call a full welding heat. But to me, the terms sweating and sparking are very descriptive. So you don't want any sparks on this. Sometimes we get a few little incipient sparks just starting. If you want to know the temperature, that's 2280. That's trivia. You want to know the temperature of where those sparks just start? 2280. After dinner conversation. But you don't want a big shower, because that's when the tool steel is going to crumble and fall apart. So we want to try to bring it out at a sweating heat. 2 or 3 sparks are permissible, not a lot.
What's the temperature of full welding?
On mild steel, I would guess, I'm not positive, about 2350 to 2400 maybe. I almost blew into the face mask. Did you ever get real tired and spit into the face mask? 398.
That's wholesale.
Yeah.
That's what the blacksmith gets.
Yes, sir.
It came off the bottom side.
I was trying to avoid this whole thing because of my bad luck on the first day, but so far so good. Knock on wood.
Any advantage of anhydrous borax, Frank, or is it just
Jim Fleming and I were talking about that the first day, and the only advantage I can see to anhydrous borax is that it doesn't foam when you put it on. A lot of times you'll put on store-bought borax and it'll kind of foam and kind of obscure what the heck's going on. But if you put store-bought borax on, doesn't it become anhydrous? Doesn't the hot metal make it anhydrous just like that? You bet. Although if you want to pay extra for anhydrous borax, if you want to make your own, take a little saucepan and put some borax in it and put it in the oven and bake it, and it'll cake up. Then put it in your blender if you got anhydrous borax. Then as soon as you take it out of the blender, it starts becoming hydrous again because it's in the atmosphere. Any other questions about anhydrous borax?
what?
Been real. And it's been charming. It's been real charming. For some reason, those old timers put a little notch on one side of the. A lot of guys think it's to open bottles or something. It's just, I think it was just style. Yeah, tell the top from the bottom. For me. I'm not going to complete this. It's getting a little boring, so in fact, I'm sick of the thing. But at least you saw the technique for hogging it out. I'll just give it a little more shape and we'll let it normalize or we'll anneal it. All these western states have brand books. They're pretty thick too. The New Mexico law is if you sell one cow, it has to have a brand on it. So the brand books get pretty thick. California brand book is, maybe they have two now, but man, the last time I saw it, it was really big. So it's a good thing to do. They're a little more difficult than you might think at first blush. if somebody asks you to make a brand that is a simple wall hanger, they want it by their mantle. It's not going to be ever near an animal. You can use 3/16 by 3/4 or 1/4 by 3/4 and just start bending it and make the stamp. And then weld on the connecting rods, weld it to about a 3-foot length with the eye. And you won't have to charge them so much. But what I usually reforge the stock. And I don't have my hammer set up for drawing it, so I do it by hand, which is really a long way around. But let me pull this bar out. This is a piece from over in the scrap pile. And I'll show you how I shape the stamp stock. This is if you're going to make a real working brand. So the cross section of the stamp stock, you can use various sizes, but if you start out with, say, horseshoe stock, which is like 5/16 by 3/4, that'll give you a nice small brand. And it'll draw out wider. The cross section I'm shooting for is this. That's the stamp stock cross section. And I take it all the way down to a scant 3/16 or even almost to an 1/8 on a horse brand right here. It's pretty narrow. That gives you a real clean brand. Up here it's going to be thicker because it helps hold the heat in the iron. And you forge it out like you do if you're making a knife blade, or at least I do. I bend the knife blade on edge, and then I forge the blade on the concave side, and then it straightens out again. You all know how to do that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to flatten this a little bit first, though, because it's the wrong stock.
Different size, Frank?
I'll just take it over to the tripper. It won't take long. Now your ranchers are real individualists, some of the last of the rugged individualists. And if Grandpappy had a brand and the stamp stock was 1.5 inches tall and the brand was 5 inches wide and 4 inches tall, by golly, you better make it that way. And he'll show you the brand too. Don't just make up any old thing. If you can see one of their branding irons to take off from, do so. Some guys, their finished stamp stock is 1 inch tall. Sometimes their finished stamp stock is 1.5 inches tall. Sometimes it's 3/8 thick at the top. Sometimes it's 5/16 thick at the top. Whatever Grandpa's brand was, I try to follow it. Makes them real happy. And furthermore, sometimes we make I make it out of leaf springs sometimes, because these guys throw these branding irons around, leave them at line camps, and they get driven over and stomped on, and they get rusty, and the leaf spring kind of holds its shape better. And also there's less scale on leaf spring than there is mild steel.
Right on this bench here, after which you can see all of the brands I made in California, or at least part of what I collected.
Yeah, I've got 2 doors at home that I have brand marks all over. I guess, but he made a V, and he finished it, and he said, "Now I gotta make another one just like it," and he winked at me. Because that's the trick. It's easy to make one. It's hard to make another one just like it. So, Mr. Kuhn also told me that he started shoeing in the early 1900s. He's passed on now. He said, "Guess what we got for shoeing?" And I said, "I don't know. 1/4 foot."
Who supplied the shoes? Made his own.
Why? No, Cape shoes were available early. No, we didn't talk too much about that. He just said, me and my brother were real happy to quit shoeing and start making brand new. That's all he said about that subject. So I'm pretending that this is the stock that I'm starting with, which is about, oh, maybe 5/16 by 7/8. And I'm going to cut off that small end. Somebody was asking me about pricing on these irons too. Of course, we're in an era of runaway inflation. I can't fight it all by myself. But I think when I started, I charged $10 for a plain bar. Just a bar with a shank and a handle. But now I think you'd have to charge at least 40 or more just for a plain bar. And then it goes up from there. So you're talking about between $100 and $200, sometimes more than $200 if the characters are real complicated. Sometimes the characters are so complicated you have to make 2 irons. And they'll show you the 2 irons that Grandpa had too, to cover that much hide, you know. So if you make a traditional handle, that's easy. It's a 1/2-inch rod. Allow about 10 inches for the ring on the end. Bend the right angle, and it's a turned eye. Some of them are oval, some of them are round. Don't forget that where you start your bend, though, to get the turned eye, there's going to be a 3-inch ring beyond that in terms of length. Draw a picture. If you allow 9 to 10 inches, that'll give you about a 3-inch ring. There's your bend. Then you're going to bring it out, bring it around. So wherever that bend is, you're going to wind up with a 3-inch longer iron. Most irons in total are about 36 inches long.
You don't fully drill that handle together.
Don't have to. Not unless you want to.
Well, I was told that the ring is supposed to have the open eye at the bottom and then on the bottom of your brand, so when the old time cowboy picks it up, puts a slot down, his brand will be straight.
I always put it opposite. Maybe Francis has an idea on this. I put the flat of the ring to the front and back of the flat of the ring faces the front and back of the iron. So when the dumb old cowboy picks it up,
You gotta hold it flat.
yeah.
But then you gotta remember which side is left and right.
Let him remember.
Up and down, simpler than left and right.
Put it upside down.
Try not to hit the anvil. Put the edge of your hammer at the edge of the stock if you can. Now this is pretty time consuming, so you have to charge it accordingly. And then I grind on this too.